Hi everyone, Elena from Arcadier here. Today on Inspire, we have Gligor Milosevic, Arcadia's own delivery manager, which means he's the guy who ensures the features that Arcadia wants to build are actually being built and on time and improved every month. Hi Gligor, thanks for joining us today from the Sydney office. How are you?
Hey Elena, I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm pretty well. So maybe you can just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you'll be sharing today.
As you just said, my name's Gligor. I'm the delivery manager. I'm basically in charge of making sure a whole lot of people do what they're supposed to do. And I guess I have to do my best to try and make sure it's easy for them to do what they need to do. And if there's something that I can do to help, then I do that as well. So like, I guess you could say, jack of all trades, master of none. Probably the best way to describe me at the moment.
No, it's super interesting. So maybe you can just tell everybody a little bit about what you're going to share today, and then you can just jump right in.
I think today we're just going to go over some of the QA processes and how we test the system after we've developed or just before pre-release, I guess, and how we ensure that what we've built works to our acceptable standard.
I'm sure everyone's very interested in hearing what you have to say about how we do our pre-releases and actually release everything. All right, well, on that note, why don't we get started?
Okay. The QA stands for quality assurance. And in our company, it's basically, when I say QA, I'm referring to the team and automation testers. Normally would have a request from the product manager or from BD. They'll come to us and say that there's a demand for a new feature, or people are requesting something, or they're unhappy with the way a feature behaves. And either we'll build something new that's being requested, or end up fixing or changing something that we've already built. So that process is kicked off by the product manager or by BD. Once that comes to me, it's my job to organize a call with Rachel and the dev and QAs. So dev lead would be Jerome and QA lead would be Edna. From there on, we discuss how that certain feature is built, how it should behave, how we want it to behave in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Basically, that's a solution design phase. Depending on the feature, depending on how many features, how complex it is and whatnot, but usually it'll be within a day. We used to do like 3-4 day solution designs and go into greater detail. And then eventually we realized that a lot of the time ends up being a waste of time because things change. And if you define it in so much detail, you spend so much time doing it. And then 2 days later, you find out, we changed something a little bit. And then that solution is no longer valid. So you just blew a whole day on nothing. So we become a little bit more, I guess you could say, slim with our solution designs. So we get all the major stuff out, get all the MVP stuff defined. And then after that, we add on to it throughout the month before the actual build begins to make sure that we don't overcommit and that all the stuff is identified and included in the build. From there on, it basically goes to the devs and to the QA team. So the devs take the specs that have been written by Rachel and I. They start building. So they determine what the best way to build it is, and they start working on that. And the QAs will pick up all the stories that I've written, or they'll go through the confluence that Rachel writes as far as details for each of the stories, and they'll write automation test cases, and then they'll write all the automation to make sure that we can run our regression test before our release in a timely manner, because the system is huge and there's so many things to be tested. You can't expect them to manually test it within a reasonable time. If we were to have no automation, it would probably take us 2, maybe even more weeks to test the system manually. Even with like 5-6 people full time, it's too big. There's too much to test. So the automation that we've built is critical. Yeah, we release. But I can show you the flow chart for the way we handle bug fixing and testing. The test environment is basically where all the code is pushed once the developers deemed it fit to be tested. Obviously, they do their own testing, but they don't have too much time to spend on testing. So they do what they can and they push it into the test environment. At that point, we use Jira to track all our cards and all that work. And at that point, the tester will mark the card as ready, developer will mark the card as ready for QA, and the QAs will pick up and test and provide feedback or log bug cards or whatever needs to be. So basically the QA test process if you're familiar with flowcharts, it kind of looks like a flowchart. I didn't use Visio to build it, so it's not technically correct, but I think it's good enough. So the test case is basically after the developer has built that particular feature or enhancement, the test cases for that card, for that feature have already been written, already been created, or already been automated if possible. So once that card is marked as ready for QA, the QAs will pick the card up and then it'll go through the process starting at the very top. They'll run the test cases and then check if it's complete. Now, when the feature or enhancement is being tested for the first time, we don't mark it as complete unless it's actually complete. There's no bugs with it. Usually what happens is at a later stage, we'll introduce something new and sometimes break something that's been already completed. And that's when this test will pick up those bugs. And obviously we run these tests every release, and we run it in between releases during regular testing as well. So once a test is run, as you can see, it's a decision point. It goes, is it complete? If it's complete, so the task is set to ready for regression. If not, then QA creates a bug card. That bug card is logged. The person that's developed this card is notified, and they obviously have to fix the bug. Obviously, we do rank bugs. Some bugs are more serious than others. They're not all equal, obviously. And they fix those bugs based on rank. And sometimes it does happen that we run out of time and we don't have enough time to fix all the bugs, but we ensure that we fix all the serious show-stopping bugs. And that way we end up releasing a product that's as close to perfect as possible. Because there's no point in fixing all the small bugs if you can't even load the website, or you can't log in, or you can't check out. Like there's no point in having a marketplace if you can't buy stuff on your marketplace. So, sometimes we have to compromise it. I would prefer that we had no bugs in the system, but we don't. If you look at Apple and Microsoft, even they have bugs in their stuff, and they're multi-billion-dollar companies. So, you can't be too upset about that. If we go down the no path, so is the task complete? No. This means that there was a bug. So they create a bug, they set it to do. At this point, all the developers go through they have a list that they look at, which is basically all the bug cards that have been created and ranked. They sort by the highest priority to lowest priority. And then as bugs are marked as down here, they appear on that list, and then they get picked up, fixed. And as the status is changed, they move from list to list. They end up in the devs list when they're ready to be completed. They end up in the QA's list when they're ready to be tested. So eventually the bug on its own will bounce back and forth until it's completed. Or if it's not completed, then someone will bring it up and say, hey, we've been trying to fix this bug for a while. There's something wrong. We'll have a more detailed discussion, but generally that's not the case. It's just a matter of fixing it and getting it tested. I guess we don't have to really go through the whole thing, but what I just described goes down this path here, where it's picked up by a developer, fixed, set for ready for QA. QA will test it again and then check, is it fixed or not? If not, then we keep going through this little loop until it's fixed. We jump back up to ready for regression. At this point, this means that the bug has been fixed in test. The feature works as it was defined that it should work. And it's ready to be pushed into the staging so that we do one final round of regression. At this point, like the difference between test and staging, you might think, oh, you're testing and staging, and it's a waste of time, but it's not. The point of staging is to pull live data and live marketplaces back into, back out of live, so we don't affect any live customers, and we can freely test on live data. Because sometimes what happens is, obviously, the test server and the staging and the live server are two different servers with different data in. We put gibberish in our, well, not always gibberish, it's meaningful, but it looks like gibberish in the test server. A lot of the times what will end up happening is the data that ends up getting saved in the live server is going to be slightly different than the data in the test server. So something like a description for an item that's more than 300 characters long. In live, that might not happen, but in test, that might happen all the time because people copy paste big chunks of text, just the big chunks of text, just to test whether it works or not. Or it might happen the other way around. So what can sometimes happen is a data-related bug can appear in live and not in test because that data just isn't present in the test server, which is why we copy live data, put it in staging, and then test against staging to make sure that okay, our features work, everything works in test. Now let's make sure that works with live data. And at that point, you step over into this section here, into the staging environment. And at this point, it's kind of the point of no return once you push into staging. It's scary because at this point, if you find that in staging there's a bug that's appeared and you didn't detect that in test, at that point you have to assess the bug, which is this flow here. So you check whether the bug's high priority. So if it's not high priority and we can live with it, then we check whether any live customers are really upset about that particular bug. It's been around for a while. And if no, then we go, okay, well, no one's upset about it. Not many people complained about it, or no one has complained about it. We can live with this bug. But if that's not the case, and it is either a game-breaking bug, a showstopper, or a bug that's severely affecting one particular customer who's a paying customer and is not happy about the bug, was complained many times, in which case we have to figure out whether it's something that we can fix directly in staging/live, or if not, and if it requires code change or code push, then we're forced to go back into test, which means that we have to cancel regression, go back to the test server, find out how this didn't show up in test and how it showed up in staging only, figure out what the problem is, fix it, and then start regression again. Now we do everything in our power to avoid this, because regression takes us about 3 days at the moment, and not counting integration testing before we start regression. And that, we don't have that much time to spend on this. We can't just blow 3 days for nothing. It's, usually we're releasing directly on, say the first, which when we say we release, or within the next 2-3 days. Any further delays than that, then we have a serious problem, which hasn't happened for a long time, thank God. So the process works, but at this stage, it's a little bit unforgiving, because once you find something in staging, you just pray to God that it's something that you can fix without having to go back to test and then back again into staging and run regression again. It's not only is it inconvenient, but it's a lot of work for the QAs as well, because they have to test the whole system. They have to run all the regression tests, they have to note down all the results, and there's a lot of work involved. So I think that's pretty much the QA process. There's not too much. This would be the platform upgrade flow, but this is similar to the QA testing. So it's, I guess, testing new features, updates, enhancements. It's all pretty much the same. We tackle it the same way. We throw it into the same system. It comes out just fine at the end. So I think, yeah, as far as the testing process, this is it.
Great. Thank you so much, Gligor. Definitely extremely insightful and helpful to know how our whole testing process works. And I'm sure that our users and viewers are very curious to how we decide to release features and at what point, we release something. What constitutes a version upgrade?
Basically, we upgrade the system once every month. There have been times we've skipped a month to combine two different sprints. Our sprints are 1 month long, which coincides with the release. But sometimes we do decide to put 2 months together if there are a lot of heavy features involved, or features that directly relate. So they may not completely depend on each other, but they go hand in hand, and it makes sense to release them at the same time. So sometimes that does happen, but generally speaking, it's a monthly release, regardless of whether there's any major system upgrades or just small enhancements. And obviously, there's always bug fixes being pushed through, because when you're releasing, I guess, on a monthly basis and building as much as we build, you're going to inevitably end up with bugs. And as long as you keep going at the pace that we're going, you're always going to have bugs to fix. So it's just a matter of trying to manage that and fix all the ones that you think people will be unhappy with.
So on that note, how do you actually decide, or how do you triage the bugs, and what makes something a showstopper versus something that, is minor and we decide that people can live with and that we'll get back to later?
Right. So that would be the triage meeting that we have Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 3 times a week. During the beginning to midterm of the sprint. Once we get within 7 days of the release, 7 days of starting regression, then we start running triages once a day. So the triage is basically, that involves the product manager, the front end designer, QA lead, dev lead, CS lead, and myself. And what we do is we go through all the bugs that the QAs have picked up throughout the week that haven't been ranked. Obviously, they're not allowed to rank them themselves. We have to all be involved in the process. What the issue is, how much damage it's doing, if it's stopping people from doing anything vital within the system, like onboarding as a merchant, onboarding as an admin, onboarding as a consumer, that's a T1. That's highest priority, no doubt about it. Anything that's affecting checkout or this item display, or adding items to the cart, or payments, or wrong display of payment amounts, anything sensitive like that is automatically a P1. Anything that falls below that can still be upgraded to a P1, but that depends on primarily two things. One would be how long the bug has been around. If it's been constantly reoccurring, then it's like, I know it's going to be annoying for people who are seeing this bug. One day it's fixed, one day it's not. I'll be annoyed. So, those ones we usually upgrade. Or anything that's been complained about by live paying customers, then it's, it deserves consideration as for an upgrade from say a P3 to a P2 or P2 to a P1. P1 being highest priority.
Got it. And what do you think are the biggest challenges for QA, either internally or just in general as well?
I think the biggest challenge for the QAs would be trying to manage the amount of features that we commit to building, because in the past we used to depend on the dev team to choose, okay, this is how much we can develop. And then we got the QA to test. But since then, our QA team has decreased in size and our dev team has grown. So it will come to a point where we have to, which isn't a bad thing, but I'll explain why. So we'll come to a point where we get the QA team to define what they can test. And then we just get developers to build it, because we know the dev team is bigger and they have extra capacity, so we don't have to worry about that. The biggest challenge would be estimating how much they can test, and also making sure that within that same release they can automate all of those tests. So it's a bit of a juggling act for them. It's not easy. There's a lot of, we usually max them out every month. I try to be as lenient as not lenient, but I try to help them out a little bit and try to pull back on some features here and there to make things a little bit easier, because they're people too.
Why sometimes it's a good thing that QA team is smaller than dev team grows and is bigger. So what's that balance about?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I forgot to go back to that. Yeah. So the reason why having a dev team slightly larger as the QA team would be because if you're constantly maxing out the dev team on building new features, they're not spending enough time fixing bugs and optimizing what we've already built. So having extra developers that can focus more on bugs, can focus more on improving the quality of the product, even if it's not on the roadmap, that makes that's a significant thing. It makes a big impact on the product when we finally release it to live. And also, as you know, we sometimes have some random requests coming in from different places where they want to build new APIs or something that we haven't planned for. In that case, if we have extra 2-3 developers, we can throw them onto that and get that built without having to affect the main roadmap. So I think that's probably the best way to set up a team. So far, it's worked the best by far.
Got it. So my next question touches on what you just spoke about optimizing pre-existing features. What's a good example of something in the past where Arcadia or any company has, there's a feature already there and then it's been optimized to make it even better?
I think I'll give you a general example, maybe not a specific one, but there's certain features that we release that we allow the customer to choose a certain experience or a certain, maybe like themes, for example, or something like that, and or set up or pick their marketplace name, right? And that's great. You let them choose. It's not like some auto-generated nonsense. It's something they pick. I want this, and that, and I want this piece of code or this text to say this, right? And usually what happens is we try to build the MVP version of the product. So what generally, well, I wouldn't say generally, but sometimes ends up happening is that they choose what they want, but they can't change it at a later stage. They have to contact us to change it from the back end. And that's inconvenient. And that's usually a lot of the enhancements that we have is enhancing that feature to allow the customer to change it themselves so they don't have to contact us. That could be one example. I think that's probably something that's most common, I would say.
Got it. It is very interesting to note that, a lot of companies in general, you want a feature to be built because you're getting a lot of feedback, but you don't necessarily know how the user is going to use it or what they exactly want from it. So how do you kind of, is that part of the whole drawing stories about how you think that people are going to use it? Or how do you try to figure out how the user or customer is actually going to be using a feature, and how often are you wrong versus right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that that's generally up to the product manager to decide on. I guess I make I make suggestions based on my experience, because I'm a nerd. I spend a lot of time on the computer. I'm surfing the web all the time. I know what I like, what I don't like, and I'd like to think that I know what people like and don't like when it comes to the UX and whatnot. But generally speaking, we get feedback from customers after when we're first building it. We try to get feedback from someone outside of the company to see what they think. Like, we do our own little version and we say, what do you think of this, right? But generally speaking, we get a lot more feedback from live customers after we released it, and they say, oh, I hate this, I love this. And we go, okay, well, we'll fix that and we'll keep that the way it is. And we'll try to stay on top of that as much as possible.
Yeah, I guess that's when our whole community and forums and feedback is really important, because we really do love hearing what customers want and don't want, or like and don't like.
Yeah, like, it's not my job to go on those forums, but I go there pretty often and have a look and see what people are asking for, and I'm just curious, and if I see something that I like, I'll let Hessa know, or let Rachel know, and ask them, what do you think of this? This guy made a good suggestion. Should we do this or that?
It's always tough trying to decide, because there's so many great and kind of crazy great suggestions and ideas out there, and it's hard to fit them all in the roadmap.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is I like UX and designs that are simple, easy to understand, and easy to use. Whereas a lot of people are the opposite. They like flashy, fancy stuff that looks great but might not be all that intuitive. So, it's like, designers are supposed to be like that, but at the same time, you have to be a little bit more realistic and I guess simple.
So on that note, I'm curious to know, what's your favorite application that has what you think is one of the best UX UIs out there, or what's something that you really love?
Like I said, I like stuff that's simple. Usually Microsoft builds stuff that's really simple and basic and looks average, I guess you could say. I don't want to use a worse word than that, but it looks average. And that's that's the kind of stuff that I have a special appreciation for. I think I know that it's because I grew up using Microsoft products, so I'm a bit biased towards them, but I do value simplicity a lot more than I do something that looks good but isn't all that practical. Because at the end of the day, we're building software that people are supposed to use to create a business, to sell stuff, to make money. It's not just there to look pretty.
So on that note, what do you think is something that's built that's impractical?
I don't really like some of the stuff that Apple builds. Like when they, for example, forcing, I'm not sure if they still do that. I haven't used, I had the iPhone 1, I had an iPhone, I think the third one that came out, had 4, had the 5, the 5S, and eventually I gave up on them because I didn't like how they handled music videos and other stuff on their phones, because they always force you to synchronize across from your desktop to your phone. And I understand why they're doing that. They want you to buy their desktops as well. They want to try to quote unquote trap you into buying a whole bunch of Apple products, which is, they're a company. I understand that, but I don't. That's why I like Microsoft a little bit more, and I like Android more, because they let you choose what you want. I don't have to synchronize. I can just drag and drop a song from my desktop onto my phone, and it's there. And it's there until I delete it or drag it back or something like that. Like, there's no synchronizing. There's no mysterious song is disappearing or file's gone missing. It's just, if I dragged it there, it's going to be there, and that's what I expect. So I value Apple as a company, but that one, if they just didn't have that, they would be, I think, the greatest company in the world. Just that one thing.
That one thing. Well, I'm trapped, so I love Apple. But,
Yeah.
but
As far as quality goes, their stuff is definitely the best. There's no doubt about that.
So there's only a couple more questions that I have for you. Something that's, looking into the future or just, in general. What's a feature that you would love to build on Arcadia or that you're looking forward to?
I think if we were to do like digital downloads, I think that would be really cool. Because currently we have like a bespoke template for buying goods that are delivered to your house, and we have the services for renting and leasing and whatnot. So I think it would be nice to have something for digital goods, for file downloads, movies, videos, stuff like that. That's not the easiest thing to do. Obviously, if you like streaming a movie, for example, it's like it could be 2, 3, 5. I don't know how big they are nowadays. I stopped downloading movies a long time ago, but that's a lot of data you got to store somewhere, so it's not cheap. But I think that would be really cool.
Agreed. And that makes a lot of sense given your whole phone comment just now.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know.
The second to last question is, obviously things will not always be perfect, and everybody, this goes for viewers, but whether it's, releasing new features or, pushing out your MVP, what's some advice you would give to everyone on how to decide when something is, quote, good enough?
Don't overthink it. I think that's probably the best advice, the simplest advice you can give, because when you're overthinking, you get a little bit lost. You got to sometimes step back, and a lot of the times having a third party that's not involved at all come in and give you an opinion, even if it's someone off the street and knows nothing about software. It doesn't have to be some expert per se, but just a third person to come in and give you an opinion. Or if you don't have that luxury, stop working on it if you can, for even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour if you can. Just go outside, have a coffee, think about something else, and come back and with a fresh mind have a second look. Because what usually ends up happening is that you blow the issue out of proportion. You lose yourself a little bit, and that can hold you back from releasing, for example, for like a couple of days to a week to weeks. And what might be the case is that no one cares about. It's just something small that you, it's a big deal because you have that opinion. So I think having somebody come in and have a look and then help you out would be a good thing to do, or just having a break and stepping back for a while to refresh yourself, refresh your memory, refresh your mind. And then, that's what I used to do for programming, because what that tends to happen is where you get stuck with a certain thought process, and it's the wrong thought process, but you're convinced that it's right, and you've already moved on to figuring out why it's not working. But at the base level, you're just wrong. And if you step outside and come back in and have a look, and you go, oh my God, what am I thinking? That's completely wrong. You immediately realize, but it's just because you didn't give yourself a chance to realize that.
Yeah, paralysis by analysis definitely exists for any job or any industry, because you definitely just start thinking and overthinking, and it just go down the rabbit hole.
Exactly. You never get out. You gotta physically stop yourself and reassess.
All right. So my last question for you is, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to give everyone today who's listening, whether it's an entrepreneur or somebody just interested in technology?
If it's like career related, I think being honest is I would say always be honest, regardless of what. Even if you make a mistake, just be honest, because a lot of the times I've noticed that people they're afraid of being wrong, and they think that if they're wrong, that it's all over. All the good work that they've done up until then is somehow invalid now because they made one mistake. And not getting stuck on that is, I think, something that everyone should work on. Like, I do my best not to do that, but I'm sure sometimes that I do. I try to catch it as quickly as I can and stop it, but I'm always honest. Sometimes I might defend something that I do when I shouldn't, but I do my best not to do that and just accept that I'm wrong, and it is what it is. Just be honest about it. It's, if you're honest and you're not giving the other person any ammunition to attack you on it, you say, yeah, I made a mistake. And then they can't sit there and criticize you for it. Like if you try to hide it and they find out, and all of a sudden, you're hiding this big error and know, how could you do that? Blah, blah, blah. If you just say, I made a mistake, then we immediately move on to the next phase. You know, okay, how do we fix this? How do we make sure it doesn't happen? What are the consequences of this? You know, it'll help you a lot, I think.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Definitely, like, even like for entrepreneurs, sometimes, you know, being honest with yourself about, you know, how your new product's going. Are people interested? Like, do you need a pivot?
Of course, yeah, yeah. Like, if you lie, it's not going to change reality. It's just in your own mind, the lie is going to live on, but reality is going to, yeah, will catch up to you eventually.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Gligor, for joining us today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Gligor, if anybody wanted to reach out to you just to talk about either programming stuff or, I don't know, you seem to be really into music,
Yeah.
or, you know, want to highlight something that they think would be super cool for Arcadia, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Best way would be through my work email. It's gligor@arcadia.com. I'm on there. I check my emails like every 5 minutes. I'll scan it, make sure nothing new's coming. I always reply as quickly as I can. So I'm pretty good with that. That would definitely be the best way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, Gligor. And everyone, that's all that we have for today. Thank you for joining. And until next time, be inspired.